Marin had kept the books clean since the beginning, not because she expected trouble, but because she'd never fully trusted that trouble wouldn't eventually come looking for a reason. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a seed catalog and an electric bill, the return address doing the particular thing government envelopes do, announcing themselves before you've even opened them. She read it standing at the kitchen counter, coffee going cold beside her elbow. An audit. Standard language. Procedural tone. She felt her pulse tick up and then, deliberately, made herself breathe it back down. She had receipts for everything. She always had receipts for everything. 3 years running her design studio out of the spare bedroom, and she'd never once rounded a number in her favor. It was almost funny. She'd been so careful precisely because she'd never believed the people around her would extend her the benefit of the doubt, and now here was the proof that carefulness mattered. The auditor's name was Denise. She arrived on a Thursday morning with a laptop bag, and the unhurried manner of someone who had done this so many times that urgency had been sanded off her completely. She sat at Marin's kitchen table, the same table where Marin had eaten cereal as a kid while her stepfather read the paper, and occasionally, without looking up, asked her when she was going to get serious about a career. Denise opened a folder, asked routine questions. Deposit history, vendor invoices, a mileage log Marin had kept with borderline obsessive precision. Marin answered each one evenly, sliding printed statements across the table like she'd rehearsed it, though she hadn't. She'd simply lived it. Then Denise paused on something. Not a red flag, exactly. More like a thread she was following out of habit. The tip that opened this, she said, was unusually specific. Marin kept her face still. Tips usually are, aren't they? If someone bothers to file one, sometimes people report a hunch. This wasn't a hunch. Denise turned the laptop slightly, not enough to show Marin the screen. Just enough that Marin understood there was something on it worth turning away from. This came with attachments, bank records, deposit patterns going back 2 years, a note about a vendor payment in March of last year, very specific dollar amount, correct to the cent. Marin felt something drop through her, slow and cold, like a stone finding the bottom of a well she hadn't known was that deep. She hadn't told anyone about that vendor payment. She hadn't told anyone the exact amount. She barely remembered it herself until Denise said it, and even then it took her a second to place it. A rush order for print samples. Paid from her business account in a month she'd been stretched thin, covering both her rent and her mother's dental bill, a fact she'd mentioned exactly once, at Thanksgiving. In a moment of tired honesty, she now deeply regretted bank records. Not guesses, not suspicion. Someone had been watching her account closely enough to know its shape. Who filed the tip? Marin asked, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. And what did they attach? Denise's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A small, professional recalibration. The look of someone who had just watched a person do the math in real time and arrive somewhere unpleasant. I can't give you a name. That's protected. A pause. What I can tell you is that this wasn't anonymous guesswork. Whoever filed this had access to information that isn't public. Personal knowledge. The kind of detail an outsider wouldn't have and a competitor wouldn't bother faking. Neither of them says the word family. Neither of them needed to. Marin thought of Russ at the head of the table, the particular quiet contempt he had for anything that didn't look like a paycheck and a lanyard. 3 years of comments disguised as concern. When's the hobby going to turn into a real job? 3 years of not being invited, and not inviting him back, to the small wins that had added up into something real. She thought of the spare bedroom, the invoices, the client she'd landed by cold emailing at 1 a.m. She thought about how none of that had ever registered with him as effort, only as something to eventually be corrected. She didn't say his name out loud. She didn't have to say anything at all. Denise, watching her, seemed to understand that too. The audit itself took another 40 minutes and ended exactly where Marin's paperwork said it would, every deposit accounted for. The vendor payment matched an invoice Marin had scanned and filed the same week she'd made it. The one actual discrepancy, a category she'd rounded wrong 2 years back, $41, a clerical shrug of an error, was already flagged in her own records with a correction note dated 18 months prior, long before any of this began. You're clear, Denise said, closing the folder. Then, almost as an afterthought, the way people mention something they've decided matters more than they're letting on. For what it's worth, when a tip turns out to be this thorough and this wrong, there's a process for flagging it. If the pattern looks less like concern and more like harassment, it's not automatic. But if you want it noted, I can note it. Marin sat with that for a moment. She thought about what it would cost her to say yes. A family already thin at the seams pulled thinner. A door that was mostly closed anyway, shutting the rest of the way. She thought about what it had already cost her to say nothing. For 3 years, every time the comments came, and she absorbed them because arguing felt beneath the work she was actually doing. Yes, she said. Noted. There was no confrontation that followed. No phone call where she said everything she'd swallowed for 3 years. She didn't tell her mother, not that night. She sat at the kitchen table after Denise left, laptop open, invoices still fanned across the wood like evidence of a life someone had tried, quietly and specifically, to unmake. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the audit, and everything to do with finally understanding the shape of something she'd suspected for years, but had never had proof of. Outside, the evening went on being ordinary. Somewhere across town, Russ was probably eating dinner, unaware, or aware, she couldn't tell anymore which was worse. That the numbers had held, that the thing he'd tried to take apart with a phone call and a folder of bank statements was still standing. Marin closed the laptop. She didn't call anyone. Not yet. The business was intact. That was the only fact she let herself hold on to that night, and for now it was enough.